The movie begins with a tranquil country house in Grantham, Virginia. However, the peaceful exterior belies the gruesome scene inside, where the aftermath of a violent crime is revealed. 4 lifeless bodies are scattered throughout the house, and blood is splattered across the floors and walls. The pattern of bloodstains suggests that the victims were attempting to flee. Sheriff Burke is summoned to the basement, where he encounters an even more puzzling sight: a woman's body, half buried in the dirt floor. Strangely, her body appears to be quite clean. Without any identification on her, the police are unable to determine the woman's identity or whether she was related to the murdered family. Consequently, they refer to her as Jane Doe. Upon examining the scene, the police are baffled. There are no indications of forced entry, and nothing appears to have been stolen. According to one officer, it seems as though the victims were trying to escape from the house, not break into it. This adds an element of mystery and horror to the situation. We are introduced to Tommy and Austin, a father-son duo who will be conducting Jane's autopsy. They have been operating a mortuary and crematorium for 3 generations. The facility appears to be stuck in time, with its dated and musty ambience providing the perfect backdrop for a horror story. While performing their duties, Tommy emphasizes to Austin the importance of a coroner determining the exact cause of death. He encourages Austin to thoroughly examine the condition of the body before drawing any conclusions. After completing his work, Tommy exits the autopsy room, leaving Austin to tidy up. Soon after, Austin is pleasantly surprised by a visit from his girlfriend Emma. She has come to spend time with him. Austin takes Emma to the autopsy room, a place she has never been before. She requests to see one of the bodies. Initially, Austin is hesitant, but Tommy enters the room and permits Emma to view an unexamined body. Emma is taken aback by the sight of a bell tied to the corpse's leg. Tommy explains that in the past, coroners would attach bells to bodies to confirm death, ruling out the possibility of a coma or suspended animation. Just as Austin and Emma were preparing to depart, a police officer arrived at their residence with Jane Doe's body. He informed Tommy that they needed to determine the cause of death by the next day and requested an immediate autopsy. To assist his father in expediting the autopsy process, Austin decided to delay his date with Emma, promising to meet her later that evening. The police officer disclosed to Tommy that they were unable to locate Jane Doe's fingerprints in their database. Once the officer left, Tommy and Austin promptly commenced the autopsy, accompanied by their customary background radio music. Austin proceeded to photograph Jane Doe's body, estimating her age to be in her 20s. Tommy conducted a thorough examination of Jane Doe's entire body, confirming the absence of scars, bruises, or any signs of bleeding. Upon examining her eyes, Tommy noticed an anomaly. Jane Doe's eyeballs were gray, a condition typically seen in individuals who have been deceased for several days. However, most indications from Jane Doe's body suggested that she had died recently. Tommy and Austin discovered various inconsistencies with Jane Doe's corpse. There was no pallor on her skin, her joint muscles weren't rigid, and her hips were disproportionately small compared to the rest of her body, which Tommy attributed to genetics. Austin documented all the observed conditions of Jane Doe's body on a blackboard to facilitate the analysis of her cause of death. Tommy then inspected Jane Doe's hands and feet and found that the bones in her wrists and ankles had been shattered. Even though there were no external signs of trauma, a seemingly impossible scenario, Austin proceeded to clean the dirt from Jane Doe's nails and hair. Upon further investigation, the soil found on Jane Doe didn't originate from the crime scene, but from a northern region. Discovering her severed tongue and restrained limbs, Tommy deduced that Jane Doe was likely a victim of human trafficking. A thread was found lodged in her throat, and one of her molars was missing. After the external examination, Tommy and Austin quickly moved on to the internal autopsy. As they were about to begin, the radio unexpectedly switched to a 1950s song, but they paid it no mind. Post-surgery, Tommy found more anomalies. Jane Doe's lungs were as black as if she had sustained third-degree burns, and her internal organs bore numerous cuts and scar tissue. During the examination, a sudden noise startled them. Austin went to investigate and saw a figure in the hallway reflected in a mirror. Upon reaching the hallway, Austin found it empty. He then proceeded to a storage room where he heard an unusual noise. Believing the sound was coming from the air vent, he checked it, only to be startled and fall. Tommy followed, and they discovered their pet cat was severely injured. To end the cat's suffering, Tommy swiftly euthanized it and reluctantly cremated it. The autopsy of Jane Doe continued, revealing a Jimson weed plant known to cause paralysis in her stomach. Additionally, Tommy found a small cloth bundle containing Jane Doe's missing molars. Upon further examination, they found peculiar Roman numerals, letters, and diagrams on the cloth. Tommy then dissected Jane Doe's skin and discovered matching symbols underneath. Simultaneously, the radio in the autopsy room began to experience interference, and all the lights in the room abruptly burst, plunging plunging the room into complete darkness. Austin quickly switched on a flashlight, sweeping its beam across the room until he found his father. To their shock, they discovered that all the bodies that were previously in the room had vanished. Tommy and Austin decided they needed to leave immediately. However, when they reached the elevator, they found it was out of order. The sound of a falling tree indicated that it had blocked the only other exit, trapping them in the basement. Austin attempted to call for help on his cell phone, but there was no signal. Hearing a series of unexplained knocks, they decided to retreat to the office. After securing the door, Tommy tried to reach the police by phone, but the line was dead. Amid the chaos, Tommy and Austin heard the ringing of a bell from behind the door, a bell they typically attached to bodies to confirm death. Austin cautiously peered through a crack in the door and was startled to see one of the missing bodies standing there. The body attempted to force its way through the door, prompting them to quickly barricade the door with a cupboard. When the ringing of the bell and the pounding on the door ceased, Austin checked the surroundings to ensure they were alone. Believing that Jane Doe's body was the source of the bizarre occurrences, they decided to incinerate her remains. They hurried back to the autopsy room where Jane Doe's body lay undisturbed. Tommy set Jane Doe's body ablaze, but the fire rapidly spread to the room's ceiling. They scrambled to extinguish the fire before it engulfed the entire room. To their astonishment, Jane Doe's body remained untouched by the flames, without a single mark. Suddenly, they heard a noise indicating the elevator was operational again. Armed with an axe for protection against any unforeseen events, they rushed towards it. They reached the elevator entrance and anxiously awaited the opening of the doors. In the darkness, Austin was confronted with a dimly lit morgue corridor. The sound of a bell echoed from the dark hallway, growing louder as it approached them. In a state of panic, Austin repeatedly pressed the elevator button, urging it to open faster. As the bell's ringing grew increasingly louder, the elevator doors finally slid open. Austin quickly ushered his father into the elevator. However, they encountered an issue when attempting to close the elevator doors. Since the doors wouldn't fully close, they were unable to ascend to the upper floor. The ringing of the bell grew ominously closer, resonating in front of the elevator doors. Overwhelmed with fear, Tommy seized an axe and struck down the figure at the door, believing it to be one of the reanimated bodies. When the bell's ringing ceased, he stepped out of the elevator, only to find Emma lying motionless. Tommy was filled with despair upon realizing that he had inadvertently killed Emma. In the face of hardship, they are convinced that the body of Jane Doe has obstructed their path to uncovering the truth about her demise. They resolve to revisit the autopsy room and devise a strategy to put an end to the horror instigated by Jane Doe. Austin proceeds to perform a detailed examination of Jane Doe's skull, extracting a sample of her brain cells and then meticulously suturing it back. Following a series of tests, Tommy infers that Jane Doe's brain cells are still functioning, indicating that in some inexplicable way she is still alive. Austin scrutinizes the symbols on a piece of cloth found within her stomach, discovering that they correspond to the 20th chapter, 27th verse of Leviticus and the year 1693. Tommy retrieves the holy book of Leviticus from a bookshelf and turns to the page containing the aforementioned verse, which advocates for the execution of witches. This triggers a recollection of the historical event in 1693, the year when the infamous Salem witch trials took place on a large scale. Tommy proposes the possibility that Jane Doe might have originated from the 17th century. This is why the police were unable to disclose her identity. He then deduces that the court in Salem might have wrongfully executed an innocent woman, mistaking her for a witch in the past who now seeks vengeance. However, there's also a possibility that Jane Doe was indeed a witch. After successfully revealing a significant detail about Jane Doe, the bell tolls once more and the absent bodies attempt to force their way into the autopsy room. Austin exerts all his strength to keep the door shut. Realizing their predicament is worsening, Tommy approaches Jane Doe's body and attempts to communicate with her. Given that technically, Jane Doe is still alive and Tommy merely needs to converse with her, Tommy then offers himself as a sacrifice to Jane Doe, pleading with her to spare Austin. Shortly after Tommy gives his consent, he experiences his ankles and wrists breaking, mirroring the injuries on Jane Doe's body. As Tommy sustains these injuries, it appears that the wounds on Jane Doe's body begin to heal. Tommy also experiences a searing pain in his lungs. Simultaneously, the injuries inflicted on Jane Doe's body during the autopsy started to mend, and even the blood that had been spilled was drawn back into her body. Tommy's eyes then took on a gray hue, and Jane Doe's eyes underwent a transformation. Tommy pleaded with Austin to end his life, to put a stop to his agony. The elder man seized a knife, cut his own tongue, and completed the ritual with a sense of urgency. Austin plunged the knife into his father's chest chest. In the midst of his sorrow and despair, he noticed that the lights had come back on and the radio was operating as usual. He then heard a voice calling out his name from outside. Believing it to be the voice of the policeman who had delivered Jane Doe's body, he dashed outside, attempting to summon help. Upon reaching the door, he tried to open it, but found that something was still obstructing it. Soon, Austin heard a cop's voice replaced by a haunting song from when they were about to autopsy Jane Doe. He was filled with terror, especially when he heard a bell sound getting closer. He found no one, but when he turned, he saw his father's ghostly figure, causing him to fall to his death in shock. The next day, police discovered Tommy and Austin's bodies at Tommy's house, the scene as eerie as where Jane Doe was first found. Jane Doe's body, still in the same state as when first brought for autopsy, was then relocated. The film concludes with Jane Doe's body being transported in an ambulance, the same song playing on the radio and her big toe twitching. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.